Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as a quick reminder, nice to see everyone again. Hope you got a good night's sleep. Missed you as well. We're here, as the chair said, debating a motion I moved for those who have just tuned in on privilege. And what that means is we had a witness here, the former Liberal minister in charge of the Liberal Green Slush Fund, Navdeep Bains, who basically gave one answer to every question, no matter what the question was last night. And as a result, was stonewalling, prevaricating, that fun word, and not answering questions anywhere near in the vicinity of what was asked. It didn't matter what the question was, the answer was the same, and the answer was it was a fair and open process of appointments. And he did the same, didn't matter whether it was coming from Conservative Bloc or the NDP. His answer was the same, regardless of the question. He didn't answer about the hiring practices of the former SDTC at CIBC where he worked. He didn't answer the questions about the phone calls that the chair of the Green Slush Fund, Annette Verscharon, who he appointed, that he made to her. He didn't answer the questions about anything to do with that appointment process or the appointment process that he appointed Andre Elise-Mateau for Cycle Capital, whose companies received 25% of the billion-dollar Green Slush Fund money, received over $100 million while she was on the board. He didn't remember any of that. In fact, he couldn't even remember appointing anyone. He just said, I made 100 appointments.
Point of order, point of clarification.
Now,
just one second.
There's no such thing as a point
Mr.
of clarification.
Yeah, sorry, I heard point of order first, so I'll go ahead, Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Yeah, just perhaps a point of clarification. I'm a bit confused. On the one hand, Mr. Perkins has said he didn't answer questions.
Order.
On the other hand,
come on.
I'm confused. He says he didn't answer the questions, and then he says he didn't recall and answer the questions.
Okay.
Which is it? He said he didn't recall. Or he didn't answer. Which is it?
Mr. Erskine-Smith, you're next on the list. You'll be able to.
Well, maybe he could get his story straight.
Get back to reviewing your dictionary.
We're wasting our time.
Well,
get his story straight. Hey, Rick, get your story straight.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
All right, just one second, Mr. Perkins. Mr. Perkins, I have Mr. Perkins. You'll have the floor in a second. Mr. Perkins.
Every single issue he's ever spoken on.
Mr. Perkins. First of all, I'm going to ask everyone to respect the interpreters. And speaking over one another is not only makes it very difficult for them to do their job, it actually potentially can be damaging. So I'm going to urge you all to respect the team that's supporting us in our important work. Mr. Duné, you have a point of order, I believe. Thank you. Yeah, it's yes. All right. Mr. Perkins.
I'm not shocked that Liberals, particularly Mr. Erskine-Smith, who's a newbie on this committee, haven't done their homework, haven't read the documents, haven't looked at the spreadsheet from the Green Slush Fund of all the grants they made over the 20 years. I'm not surprised that he hasn't made the effort to do that. He's too busy interviewing the current finance minister, conflict carbon tax Carney, to do his homework on this committee. He's too busy promoting his podcast with the soon-to-be former Prime Minister and trying to rescue his career than doing his parliamentary work on this committee, which is to actually read documents other than the PMO speaking points that he's given that deal with the issue of the corruption of the $400 million of stolen money by Liberal appointees. I thought Mr. Erskine-Smith had more integrity than that, than to worried about $400
Point of order.
million
Like, what is this absolute bullshit? This is absolute bullshit.
Whoa.
Come on.
Okay,
come on,
all right.
Come on. My integrity?
Let's,
okay. Right off.
Okay, all right. Mr. Perkins, I'm going to ask you to get back on topic. I'm going to ask Mr. Erskine-Smith, I understand your irritation. First of all, your language. I'm going to ask you to retract your language.
I'll retract when he retracts. He impugned my integrity, deeply unparliamentary. All right, we can both retract, Chair.
Mr. Erskine-Smith, well, I'm talking about your curse words, not what you actually said. Now, we all have ample time to speak today. we all can see that when we interrupt a member, everyone gets wound up. Let's just let everyone have their share of their time, and you're welcome to respond to it in your time. And I believe if we show each other the courtesy, while we might not always like what's being said by other members, I think the thing we ought to do is just listen and get through this in a civilized manner. Mr. Erskine-Smith, I'm not going to press it with you, but I will ask you to use parliamentary language and not curse in a committee setting. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor again, and please stay on topic.
I will stay on topic. Witness testimony, such as Annette Visharan, that said, which obviously MP Erskine-Smith hasn't read, said that she never applied, she said it 3 times, for a single job in her life, including this job. Yes, conveniently afterwards, she filled out the application after the minister called her twice to ask her to do the job. After Minister Baines refused to answer the question, even those phone calls or the content, perhaps MP Erskine-Smith could do some of that reading. Perhaps he could also do some reading about Andre-Lise Mateau, who former Liberal Minister Baines, overseeing the Green Slush Fund, appointed in 2016 to the board, whose company's got more than $100 million of Green Slush Fund money while she was on the board. Perhaps Mr. Erskine-Smith could read the testimony of previous witnesses, including the chair of the fund, who admitted that when Andre-Lise Mateau was moved by the Liberals to the Infrastructure Bank board for a new appointment, the first thing she did was approve $170 million for the slush fund chair's company, NR Store. But that would require a little bit of research. It would require research to find out that in 2023, the Natural Resources Department gave Ms. Visharan's company $50 million. That's after the staff were employed at SDTC to find her company more money, since her company was rejected finally for SDTC money because of conflicts. These are the testimonies that the
Mr.
minister
Perkins,
refused
Mr.
to
Perkins,
answer.
Mr. Perkins, I have a point of order for Mr. Drain.
So I just want you to be fair when you're applying the rules, Mr. Perkins, and I didn't raise a point of order on this, but he evaded on the motion on the floor, the current motion on the floor. You allowed him to speak, so I'm expecting that you will not interrupt me when I talk about the same issues as Mr. Perkins is talking about. I just want the chair to apply the same rules for everyone. I'm taking notice and I'm recording what we've got blues, because I'll repeat them. If I find that you're not being fair, I will raise a
That's fine, but again, I'll just relevance, which I urge Mr. Perkins to get back to. No repetition and no reading. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor.
Relevance, of course, is that these questions were asked of former Minister Baines, the architect of the Liberal Green Slush Fund, who refused to answer. He gave the same answer to every question. Every question, regardless what the question was, the answer was not relevant, and that's what prompts privilege. When we asked him about the issue of the appointment process of Ms. Visharan, all he could say is, I made appointments, I don't remember. These things are why we're here on talking about the privilege motion I moved, because while it's true, witnesses can give answers to questions that members may disagree with, but they have to actually be relevant to the question. And he didn't give one single answer to any opposition member relevant to the question. And Mr. Erskine-Smith knows that because he was here in the committee and he heard it. Now, maybe he had a challenge understanding that when a member says, did you talk to Annette Visharan in a phone call about the appointment, that he says it's a application process and a fair and open process. I guess he doesn't understand how to make the connection between yes or no, I spoke to her or I didn't, versus saying some automatron, hologram type answer where he was pre-programmed to say one line all the time. And I understand that the Liberals are upset that every time we have a meeting, and we, except for former Minister Baines, that they're upset that we uncover and reveal more Liberal corruption. And all other witnesses have been here answering the questions and revealing shocking revelations about these Liberal appointees that were appointed by the Prime Minister, handpicked by the Prime Minister, and put in by Navdeep Bains. Somebody told him to do it because it's very clear he didn't know what to do, so he was just told something, because all he does is seem to repeat things that other people tell him to say. And we're trying to get to the bottom of that, and it's incredible that the privilege breach that we saw yesterday with former architect of the Liberal Green Slush Fund, Navdeep Bains, is not seen by Liberal members, is something to be troubled about. They're not troubled by the theft of $400 million. They're not troubled by the fact that that only represents half of what the Auditor General had available to look at. The Liberal members, including MP Erskine-Smith, have never even once acknowledged the fact that out of the $856 million in the audit period that the Auditor General looked at, that only half of the conflict of interest were revealed, because she only looked at half the transactions. And shockingly, 82% were there. And Mr. Erskine-Smith would have us believe that an ADM sitting in every meeting never reported anything to Minister Bains. About 82% of the time, these Liberal appointees voting money for themselves. Never once a senior bureaucrat, would have never reported that up to Minister Bains or Minister Champagne, who was also silent for 40 months on this and never said anything till it was public. These are the issues of privilege that former Minister Bains breached, and that's why we're here, and that's why the motion's on the table. And I will leave it at that for now, Mr. Chair, just because I'm sure we'll have great insight from the Liberal members, and perhaps an explanation from Mr. Erskine-Smith about his language.
Thank you very much. Next is Mr. Erskine-Smith. You have the floor, please.
Rick, you impugn someone's integrity. You deserve every language that comes your way. There's nothing more important than a member's integrity, and you have no business impugning mine. Because what are you doing right now? What are you doing right now, Rick? You have brought a privilege motion, an incredibly high bar. And on what basis? Well, before Mr. Bains was even finished his testimony, you brought a privilege motion. We're happy to have him back and answer clear questions. And look, I'm not even disputing. You can say I didn't like all of his questions. He wasn't as forthcoming as I'd want him to be. You can't say I don't recall isn't an answer. That's what, on the one hand, you said he's not answering my questions. On the other hand, you're saying it's insufficient for him to say I don't recall. Unless you're accusing him of deliberately misleading you and members at the committee, unless that's the accusation, which I haven't heard, but if that's the accusation, then your privilege has not been breached. And I want to run through just how high of a standard we actually are talking about here, because, and I would love at some point, I'll come back to this, but I would love the clerk and analyst to clarify that. I mean, when I run through the rights of members around free speech, the privileges of members, a breach of privilege occurs when there is a disregard or attack on the rights, powers, and immunities of the House and its members, either by an outside person or body or by a member of the House. That's what a breach of privilege is, okay? And all breaches of privilege are contempts of the House. A breach of privilege is always contempt. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Deliberately misleading testimony. In 2003, the former privacy commissioner was found in contempt of the House for providing deliberately misleading testimony during hearings of the Standing Committee on OGO. Deliberately misleading testimony. Is that the accusation? I haven't heard it. If you're going to make an accusation of breach of privilege, make sure it's consistent what a breach of privilege actually is. In 2008, Deputy RCMP Commissioner Barbara George was found in contempt of the House for providing misleading testimony during the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, hearings into allegations of mishandling of the RCMP's pension and insurance plans. We also know impeding access to the House is a breach of our privilege. The denial of access and significant delays experienced by members of the House constitute a contempt of the House. That's nowhere near where we are at the moment. Refusal to attend in the face of a summons. We had in 2013 a failing to allow a witness to appear before a Senate committee by the RCMP that was investigating harassment in the RCMP. That was found to be a breach of privilege, and rightly so. Refusing, failing to attend, or in that case, impeding the ability of a witness to attend. I could run down a longer list. You know, the United Kingdom on parliamentary privilege has a list of contempts here, where assaulting, threatening, obstructing, or intimidating a member or officer of the House in the discharge of their duties, deliberately attempting to mislead the House or committee, as I've mentioned, deliberately publishing a false or misleading report of the proceedings of the House, removing without authority papers belonging to the House, falsifying or altering any papers belonging to the House, deliberately altering, suppressing, concealing.
I have a point of order, Mr. Erskine-Smith. Excuse me just for a second. Yeah. Yes, Mr. Genuis.
Mr. Chair, this member who's speaking right now just had a full-on meltdown where he used a grossly, obviously unparliamentary language. He was asked by you to withdraw those comments. He refused to withdraw those comments. Frequently in the House, when you have even much more minor or marginal cases, members are required to withdraw based on the authority of the chair, and this member has just shown grotesque, flagrant disregard for the rules of the House, literally dropping an F-bomb and saying that it was deserved and saying he won't apologize. And I believe it is within your authority to tell him that he cannot continue to speak on the basis of his refusal to withdraw on parliamentary language. And obviously that's within your discretion. But this is not an ambiguous case. This is a Liberals desperate, having meltdowns on the microphone, using gross, foul language in unparliamentary ways. And
or how about
Callan,
interrupting someone who impugns my integrity, Garnett? Get out of here.
Okay, Mr. Erskine-Smith.
I'm not going to get out of here.
There was
I know the rules, and you should follow them.
So Mr. Erskine-Smith, I
haven't mentioned anything about bathtubs, buddy.
Mr. Erskine-Smith, look, Mr. Perkins was under barrage yesterday in a manner that he thought was unfair. I would ask you to
Hold on,
Mr.
Chair, on that same point of order.
Sure. It's a request. I'm trying to keep things moving along here.
Well, I've heard him retract the comments.
Okay, well, then,
so I would ask you to go back to the Blues and check, because I've heard Nate Erskine-Smith retract his.
Let me just ask Mr. Erskine-Smith. Mr. Erskine-Smith, did you in fact withdraw?
Sorry, withdraw my remarks in relation to Mr. Perkins, or not talking about bathtubs, buddy?
The cursing. Mr. Durant seems is under the impression.
I would be pleased to retract my comments. I assume you will also ask Mr. Perkins to retract his comments where he impugned my integrity.
So I'll take that as a no. I mean, Mr. Erskine-Smith, I'm not going to be over the schoolyard nanny. You have the floor, but you're conducting yourself in a manner that is not appropriate.
You gave us less than an hour's notice, Chair, if you want to talk about appropriate behavior.
Mr. Erskine-Smith, you repeatedly complain about this committee schedule. As I said to you in response to an email, you need to work with your team and your whip if it's not conducive to your schedule. You have the floor again.
Again, the threshold for a breach of privilege is incredibly high. We have to take this incredibly seriously where it occurs. And again, running down the list, falsifying, deliberately misleading, falsifying documents without reasonable excuse, refusing to provide information or produce papers formally required by the House, without reasonable excuse, disobeying a lawful order of the House, interfering with or obstructing a person who is carrying out a lawful order of the House, bribing or attempting to bribe a member to influence the member's conduct in respect of proceedings of the House, intimidating, preventing, or hindering a witness from giving evidence, assaulting, threatening, or disadvantaging a member or a former member on account of the member's conduct in Parliament, divulging or publishing the content of any report or evidence of a select committee before it has been reported to the House. I would love to understand how when Mr. Baines comes and says, I don't recall how that amounts to a breach of privilege. Might be insufficient. I say let's have him back. Answer an additional 2 hours of questions. No one's hiding from accountability. Let's have him back. But what is happening now is not only a waste of our time, and you might say, well, you guys are wasting time at the committee. Well, you know why we're spending time at this committee? So to make sure that this doesn't become a waste of House time. And we all know what's happening in the House right now, that we have privilege motions where the Conservatives have weaponized process to ensure that the House cannot function. And if this privilege motion were to pass, which would be absurd because it's not anywhere close to a breach of privilege, and the Speaker will swat it away. But if it were to pass, if we as a committee were to say, send it to the Speaker, well, we are going to waste countless hours. We're going to waste days. We know this because we see it right now. We're going to waste days of House time on something that is frivolous, absolutely frivolous. If we want to get answers from Mr. Baines, let's have him back for 2 hours. Let's have him back for 2 hours within 14 days. Please, let's stop wasting our time and making a mockery of the process of this House.
Thank you, Mr. Erskine-Smith.